There was nothing else at all in the whole world but football.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Triple F for another episode of the Triple F Show. My name is Simon, and I was joined by Les, a great friend of mine, big Spurs fan. Unfortunately for him, can't all be perfect. And obviously myself being an Arsenal fan, we came up with our all-time North London combined 11. So Arsenal and Spurs players, the greatest of, you know, those sort of positions and those players that we could think of. We try and combine in a greatest 11. You might say that the Spurs side is somewhat unconventional, but you know, Les is a Spurs fan. Like I said, it's difficult enough, but I'd like to think that with the Arsenal side, I've come up with the legends that deserve to be on that starting 11. And you know, we sort of mentioned at the end the bench would be fantastic playing against any side. Just thinking of the prospect of that side, and then with the bench as well, it's pretty impressive. However, I would have loved to release this a bit closer to the proposed North London derby that we were supposed to have on Sunday, but unfortunately we weren't able to get that done because it was a postponement from Arsenal's side. You know, there was a lot of furor over that, but you know, it is what it is, and we had to do it. I would have loved to have released this a bit closer, but unfortunately, you know, time's got in the way a little bit. The Liverpool game, I'd love to release it before then. I'd love to release it before the Burnley game this afternoon. I'm hoping that we'll get a nice win against Burnley today, so this will be a nice little cherry on the top for all us Arsenal fans and just football fans in general. I think this will be a nice, interesting listening for you. So I hope you guys all enjoy. I hope you're all doing well, and thanks again for listening to the Triple F, and take care. Bye-bye. For all the energy and the conflict and the aggression that we would have had yesterday, I'm hoping that our little chat, and just to explain to the listeners and the viewers, we are going to be compiling an all-time Spurs Arsenal 11. I'm hoping this is going to substitute for all of the friction that we should have had yesterday. But I mean, I can see this being a bone of contention for the both of us. I'm wondering how many Spurs players you've gone for and how many Arsenal players I've gone for. But I've tried to be somewhat fair, but we'll just have to see.
Well, I decided to be fair. That's why I haven't picked any Arsenal players.
Well, yeah, I've just gone for the Invincibles, so we'll just drop the mic there and I'll leave it at that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. That's one of the problems, isn't it? You know, I think one of the really interesting things about this is suddenly when you do this. I mean, I've had this view for a long time. It's not just about doing this. It's nonsense to compare players from different ages. It's a bit like comparing Ball to Djokovic, isn't it? You know, one was playing with a wooden racket, and the other one's, you know, sort of got a team of about 500 people seemingly behind him.
Yeah,
it's not quite that many, but you know what I'm saying. You know, it's a totally different.
It would be sport. Like sort of comparing George Best to Cristiano Ronaldo. It's just, you can't.
Absolutely. And I think this is where it becomes difficult, because if you clearly are in the Spurs, talking about Spurs, I mean, I think what we would say is that we've really only, and in my lifetime, because I don't quite go back to the 1951 league winning side, which was mostly pretty spectacular, the push and run side. I saw my first game in 56, so I've been watching a long time. And really, the Spurs double team was a very, very good team, one of the great teams of all time. And since then, we had a decent team in about 71, 73 era. We had a pretty good team with our dealers in Hoddle in the early 80s. And then, you know, since 1991, you know, it's just been a desert. And we had a decent time under Pochettino, the first few years under Pochettino, but of course we didn't win anything. So, you know, it's very difficult. having said that, Spurs have had a hell of a lot of really outstanding players, far more than the teams. You know, I mean, the problem is when you're trying to decide on these things, is comparing a player who played in 1961 to the game as it is now, where, you know, or even, I mean, if you were comparing, say, the really great players, and I'm talking about the really, really great players, you know, Pele, Maradona, Messi, Ronaldo, my argument would be, people say, oh yeah, well, these two guys are much better because they're more athletic, they're this and that. They've never experienced the kind of tackling that Maradona got or Pele.
No.
And anyone doubts that, go on YouTube. I'm sure it'll be on YouTube. Look at Brazil, Portugal in 1966 World Cup, or Italy versus Argentina, I think it was in the 82 World Cup, and see what brutality is really like on a football field.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And also what you have to remember, and I think people forget this, everyone assumes that these blokes who were fearsome reputations, British terms, Norman Hunter, these kind of people, in world terms, you know, if you look at the 82 Italian team that won the World Cup and kicked Maradona to hell in the game they had players like Gentile and Tardelli. These guys were brutal, but they were great players as well. It wasn't just that they were brutal, but they couldn't play. They could play as well. We're not just talking about donkeys that are kicking people up in the air. We're talking about outstanding players.
Yeah.
But the rules as they were interpreted at that time, the laws of the game as interpreted at that time, were totally different to the way they are now. So it makes it very difficult. You know, any Spurs fan will say, I think, any Spurs fan of my generation, it will be very hard not to have Dave Mackay in the team. Now, the reality under the modern rules is that Dave would be off in the first 5 minutes of every game.
Yeah.
Because he was very good with the ball, but one of the things that he had was this destructive tackling, you know, slide tackling. Remember, the pitches weren't like now with grass, they were nearly mud heaps. And this guy would slide in from 5 or 6 yards away. He'd take the ball, the man, not necessarily in that order, but he'd come out with the ball. That was perfectly acceptable at the time.
Yeah.
Now, if he was playing now, he'd still be a great player because he would adapt. Great players adapt. Yeah. But it's very difficult to compare a guy who wouldn't last 5 minutes before he was sent off with the guys who are playing now. No, there's nobody in the Tottenham team who would be even within the same ballpark in terms of the destructiveness of their tackling. Even really outstanding players, and I'll be kind about Tony Adams, even guys like him, you wouldn't be able to compare them to Mackay's tackling, because by then I think the rules were starting to be interpreted slightly differently. Yeah. So it's really difficult when you're trying to compare these players and the pitches. Look at now. What's so much better about the game now? Well, depends what things you want, but definitely the biggest thing, as far as I can see, Simon, is the pitches. Because when I was first going to football, by about November, I should think, sometimes it seemed even earlier than that, the pitches were awful. And you were literally seeing guys dragging the ball through the mud. Yeah. You know,
I've seen the images. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's very difficult to compare that. In English football at that time, I would say Wembley and Ipswich. For some reason, Ipswich had a lovely pitch. But everyone used to complain about them, saying they were too hard on the players. Too many players got too many injuries on those pitches. Yeah. So, and yet now no one would say they were great pitches compared necessarily, because all the pitches are great.
the formation that I've gone for my team is 4-3-3. So if we just sort of, discuss our formations first, what sort of formation have you gone for?
Well, I think one of the big problems with this is that I quite like the 4-3-3. One of the issues, of course, is that you could fiddle the formation slightly, because you could put in the back four someone like Mackay or Petit. One of the things I would say, I think this is sometimes where it is slightly difficult, is that I never quite understood with Arsenal. I mean, Vieira and Petit, the fact they played in a World Cup winning team, and their history at Arsenal says they're both outstanding players. I always thought Petit was the more influential player, because I don't think, that's why I always used to think with Petit that he was the best midfield player defensively I'd seen since Mackay, which is a big call, and many people would not agree with me on that. But I think they are players that actually allowed you almost to cover up, any defensive frailties, and it's just interesting. So I'm quite happy going 4-3-3.
Excellent.
And there is one choice here that's very easy, isn't there?
Was that the whole 11 being Arsenal players?
No.
No, I'm joking.
Yeah, no. Well, I would say that the one thing that is very easy in this team, and I don't think anyone could argue, is that Pat Jennings will be in goal. And I say that, I'd be interested if you're going to go to someone different, because I think, again, obviously, people say, but he didn't have to kick the ball. No, he didn't, but he also had to be, he had to contend with big centre forwards who were whacking him and things like that. But I think if you look at British football, I think if you took in top goalkeepers, you're probably going Jennings, Banks, Shilton, Schmeichel. You can argue about the order of those, but I would say, that's pretty. Yeah, there's been other guys. I think you're going to go for Seaman, aren't you?
I have done, but I'll mention that I did mention Pat Jennings, because I've written a little bit of a blurb for each one of my selections, and I have wrote that Pat Jennings and Jens Lehmann were a consideration for me. Pat Jennings, I did consider him, especially because he, represented both teams, and he achieved brilliant for both teams as well. So brilliant things, but I don't know. For me, maybe it's just a personal choice, but for something about David Seaman that just represents that sort of just an excellent goalkeeper, both for England and the fact that he was representing Arsenal as well. Just growing up, I just see him as the goalkeeper of Arsenal, and I just thought he was an excellent. And then you look at his contribution whilst he was at Arsenal: 3 league titles, 4 FA Cups, 1 League Cup, and a UEFA Cup Winners' Cup. I mean, obviously, a lot of that is down to teamwork, and a lot of that.
I was going to say he was playing behind a very good defence.
He was, but at the same time, it wasn't as if he was standing behind the goal. He was there for a reason, and he deserved to be there because he was a cracking goalkeeper. But it's it wasn't an easy choice for me. So I'll give you that sort of consolation. But I'll tell you now, I've gone for, I think, 6 Arsenal players and 5 Spurs players. So if you want, I'm willing to barter with you, and I would happily go with Pat Jennings, considering he represented Arsenal as well.
Let me just say something in response to your argument. No one's not arguing that Seaman wasn't a top goalie.
No.
But just to say how many good goalies these two teams have had, and this is why I'm really confident that Pat Jennings would be the choice of most people. I think if you spoke to most Arsenal fans from 75 downwards or whatever, they would go for Jennings, in my opinion. I would say, because when I first went to Spurs and Arsenal, because we used to go to both quite a lot, you had Ted Ditchburn, Jack Kelsey, brilliant, both international guys, brilliant players. Since then, you've had, you know, a whole succession of outstanding goalies for both teams. But there's only one Pat Jennings, and I think when you look at the length of his career, the fact that he was outstanding at Spurs, he was outstanding at Arsenal, even though he is a Spurs man, he's never pretended that Arsenal was a bigger club for him as Spurs. But to me, I was surprised. I think this is where you get to the generational thing, isn't it? Because I was thinking, yeah, well, it's easy. We got one. Now we just got to argue over 10.
I think this is going to be a lot trickier than you thought, mate. But for me, you know, you've made a good argument, and I'm somewhat happy to put Jennings in there, considering he was, you know, as you mentioned, he was obviously more of a Spurs man, but he was a big contribution to Arsenal's history as well. So I'm more than happy to give you a bit of leeway there and put him in. So I'm more than happy to put Pat Jennings in goal for our greatest 11. I'll just go on to my right back. I think I'll surprise you somewhat here. So I've actually gone for a Spurs player. I've gone for Steve Perryman. 2 FA Cups, 2 League Cups, 2 UEFA Cups. A lot of Arsenal fans might think I'm being a little bit kind here, but because you could put the likes of Lee Dixon, Lauren, but you know, even from a Spurs side, you might think there's some Spurs players that would go over Steve Perryman.
Trippier, Carl Walker, particularly.
Paul Baker from the double winning side of 60-61.
Peter Baker,
yeah. You know, have somewhat more impressive trophy cabinets. But I've just gone for Perryman just for the kind of player he was, extremely versatile because he was able to play in midfield. But I think it was his later days where he sort of transitioned into a right back. And he actually won the Football Writers Association Award in 1982, which just for me just sort of puts him above any other right back for me. I don't know. I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are on me going for him.
Well, I mean, clearly right back has not been Spurs' strongest position over the years. But Peter Baker, I mean, this is where it's difficult to judge players. Players like Peter Baker, the problem they had, that they never looked as good. Because Spurs, you know, we're talking now about the press. Well, Spurs pressed a lot with the ball. Basically, they'd have 7 or 8 men attacking. So when the opposition broke away, you probably had 3 defenders and a goalie with the 7 guys running back, you know what I mean? And some of them weren't running back, you know. So it's very difficult to judge those players. I mean, I think Perryman, if you were looking over the league season, Perryman was the total player in terms of enthusiasm. But there's some really good players as well. I mean, a guy, I would never have remembered this guy until somebody I know very ridiculously said that Howe has just gone to Newcastle, Eddie Howe. His dad was Don Howe. Well, that's absolutely nonsense. But Don Howe played for Arsenal in the 1960s. And I think he was voted, he was at West Brom before that. And I read that recently, I just looked him up. I think he was voted in West Brom's greatest ever team. And this is the thing about caps. In 1966, obviously, George Kane was a fullback, right back. But I think the rest of the squad, I think the other 2 fullbacks, there might have even been a fourth, but certainly I think Armfield and Howe were the other fullbacks. Now, we keep going on about how great the fullbacks we've got at the moment. That's true. For the first time in very, very many years, we have 3 or 4 really good right backs. It's been a weak position, in my opinion, for a lot of the time. So, you know, Don Howe, absolutely outstanding player. You know, and this is where it's difficult. How you had Pat Rice, didn't you? All these kind of players. And I think that it depends, and again, it depends what you're picking players on. are we picking players who are going to play in a cup final? Are you going to pick teams that are players that are going to win the league? And if you're going for win the league, yeah, I think Perryman's a good shout, you know.
But I also think he's quite good for cups because, like I said, 2 FA Cups, 2 League Cups and 2 UEFA Cups. So, he's not too bad. I just want to apologise as well. I've done that typical Arsenal fan thing where I've called Peter Baker Paul Baker. So,
Totally all right. Totally all right. I mean, the thing, the Spurs side early 80s, I mean, was a team that probably, when you look at it, you think, how the hell didn't they win the league? And in 82, they should have won the league, I think, despite the fact Liverpool had a great side as well. Well, it's probably one of the reasons they didn't do it. But they played so many games that season. Of course, you only had one sub. And it's really quite funny. I did, just to say, when people say about too many games, this is a memory from the cup final in 82. And you mentioned it actually involves Perryman. Perryman was one of the guys you would never, ever see him not give 100% right through the whole game. And there was a ball rolling out in the last couple of minutes of the cup final when players are later. The ball was rolling out of play, which he could have, it was going to be thrown to QPR. And he didn't run, and he couldn't even run for it. He was that exhausted, he couldn't run. And, you're looking at a guy who there's no greater enthusiast in Spurs history probably than him in terms of effort. And, you've got guys who are literally out on their feet because they played so many games. And now you're having people saying this is dangerous. Well, maybe it is. But it's difficult to compare with, what they had back then.
I mean, for all the research that I did on Perryman, a lot of the stuff that was coming up was, almost considered sort of Mr. Spurs during that time, just for the sort of commitment and the determination that he gave in a Spurs shirt. It was, it was fantastic. And I think, it just technically, as a footballer goes, he was pretty well gifted as well. And, you don't do that. You don't win the Football Writers Association Award for no reason. So like I said, a lot of Arsenal fans might be screaming at me through the TV screen here that why is Lee Dixon not there, or Lauren or whatever. But I just think Steve Perryman, from all the research that I've done, he deserves his right on this list. If you're interested in coming on the show for an Under the Floodlights special to talk about your favourite player or manager, please email the FFF2021@gmail.com or DM the FFF84 on Twitter. All contact details will be in the episode description. Hope you're all keeping safe, and thanks again for listening to the FFF.
So you got into your centre backs?
I'm gonna go with Mr. Arsenal himself. I couldn't put anybody else but Tony Adams. I think something that helps to sum Tony Adams up as a player and a man is the fact that he was appointed Arsenal captain at the age of 21 in 1988, and he remained club captain for the following 14 years. Even with a captain like characters of Vieira, Keown, Campbell, I'm sorry to swear there. We'll get on to it later. I'm sure I'm going to mention his name, and you're not going to be too happy. But and even Henri was there as well. All these types of characters that were there, but you couldn't give that armband to anyone but Mr. Arsenal himself. And there aren't many players that commit their entire careers to one club, but when they do that, alongside helping the club to prestigious trophies, then that just really cements the likes of Tony Adams into a legendary status. And, he's got a statue outside of the stadium for a reason. 4 league titles, 3 FA Cups, 2 League Cups, and 1 UEFA Cup Winners' Cup. You can't help but have him on the list. But
I think the greatest compliment you could pay Adams is the donkey thing, the Eeyore thing that there was never forget this. I'll do this tale very, very quickly. It was the Charity Shield, must have been 91, 92, it must have been, start of the 92 season. and Arsenal warmed up. Yeah, both teams were out on the Spurs end was the tunnel end of the old Wembley, so he had to walk back through on his own. For some reason, he went back on his own, and the whole of the Spurs end. Remember, it wasn't like the cup final. The whole of the end was Spurs. There's probably 40-odd thousand Spurs fans. A few dignitaries of the Charity Shield or Community Shield or whatever you are, and he had to walk back, and the whole end kind of was in full flight doing the Eeyore thing. And I thought, well, you've got to be, it was just one of those priceless moments. But no wonder he turns a drink. It was just.
Oh, you got to be made of nails to withstand something
absolutely,
like that.
Yeah.
So, are you happy to put him on the list then?
Yes, yeah. I would thought you'd go for him.
What were your centre backs?
Well, the centre backs I would have probably have gone for. I think you're probably going to go for Ledley, though I think it's very difficult to judge Ledley because of the injuries. The Spurs double team had Maurice Norman, another very regular England player at that time, very, very good centre back, very much in the Tony Adams mould. So we could probably, it's hard to compare, but they were very similar kind of players. As I said, Phil Bill, I think one of the great, perhaps the most underrated Spurs player in lots of ways, especially defensively. But the guy I would argue for is very much in the modern time. But I think the 2 years for Tongan, before had a really bad season at the end, but the previous 2 years, I thought he carried that team. When he first was there, I think everyone thought the Tongan's very good with Alderweireld. But I think by the end, most Spurs fans would say Alderweireld was very good with the Tongan. And I think, there's a very strong argument for Vertonghen on the basis of those couple of years. Now, obviously, it wasn't a long period like Adams or Maurice Norman and these kind of players. But I think there's a very strong argument for Vertonghen. I think if you look at some of the Arsenal back four under George Graham, I mean, you could almost argue for that on its own, couldn't you?
Yeah.
Now I don't think they could because VAR would be driving them balmy when they all go when they go out with their arms up. They wouldn't know. The flag won't go up.
Yeah.
But I would think that I think Vertonghen is a pretty good shout. Perhaps more so that if you're going to have Adams, I think Vertonghen would be an ideal partner for him personally.
I mean, I mentioned his name before, and where we've gone with Pat Jennings, more or less covering both Spurs and Arsenal.
No.
I know this is a player that I'm sure you're not going to take him whatsoever as for Tottenham's side, but I mean, you can't ignore the fact that what he achieved, not just for Arsenal, but I mean, are you just erasing absolutely everything that he achieved for Spurs as well? Because what he did achieve. 255 appearances, 10 goals, which is actually more for what he scored for Arsenal. Captain's armband, and he won the League Cup there too. I mean, all of that I completely understand your sentiment, and I do get why he's considered a Judas, but that's nothing to be sniffed at. What he achieved there is fantastic.
Do you know what? I'll say this is my honest opinion. I fully understand why you're talking about him. I don't think when he was at Spurs, he was quite as good as some of those other players I've mentioned. The difficulty is that when he went to Arsenal, he actually improved because he was obviously playing in a better team anyway. Obviously, one of the advantages is if you move to a better side, you tend to look better anyway. So it's a really difficult one. But you know darn well that no Spurs fan is going to agree that he should be in the team. But I mean,
Yeah.
but I do understand. I mean, should we we'll leave that as Vertonghen or Campbell?
Yeah, agree to disagree. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah,
I know you're putting yourself on a on difficult territory by agreeing to Sol Campbell. No, that's absolutely fine. Left back, I'm guessing, should be an easier sort of discussion. I've gone with Ashley Cole. Just I just can't really see how there could be any argument for that, really. I mean, Kieran Tierney, obviously, he's got a lot to do for Arsenal. Shows promise and potential to be as good, if not better, than Ashley Cole. But Cole was just an absolute golden left back as an Arsenal player, not just sort of attacking wise, but defensively as well. It was just a real fantastically all round. And as hard as it was for you to talk about Sol Campbell, it's just as hard as me to talk about Ashley Cole, because he's scum in my eyes for when he went to Chelsea. So it's I hope you can sort of sympathise.
Yeah, I mean, I just mentioned, just very briefly, and I'm not going to even argue for them. I mean, I think that obviously Arsenal had guys like Bob McNabb, who was a very good player. Spurs double team had Ron Henry. Ron Henry is the classic example I was saying about earlier. Ron Henry played once for England and yet was a tremendous player. But he was up against Ray Wilson. Now, this is why I'm going to have to agree with you about Cole. I think the best two fullbacks England have ever had, you'd have to discuss whether it was Wilson or Cole. Obviously, the game changed a bit, so you can't really even compare them, because one was playing in the era when defending was, you were judged as a fullback on how good a defender you were. Teams tended to often have, very tricky wingers. We have a bit less of that now. So, I'm afraid you're right. You're going to have to go. I think no one's going to argue about Cole. I mean, there will be people that say, yeah, well, Danny Rose was very good for a couple of seasons. And he was, but he wasn't quite as good as Cole. You can easily argue for him, and I think most Spurs fans would accept that.
Yeah. Right, just moving on to the midfield, and just to quickly sort of explain that I've gone for two sort of central midfielders, and then a somewhat of a central attacking midfield role. But I'll get onto this later. But that sort of player is going to be allowed the sort of freedom to roam all over the place, because they're a magical player. But yeah, we'll get onto that later. I do want to start with, and you've mentioned him already, he could easily have played in centre back, and I'm sure you'll be pleased to know that I've gone with Dave Mackay. And I just want to quote you on this first, because I sent you a bit of questioning around Mackay, what type of player was he, and I'm just going to quote your email here. And you said, I know it's hard for any gooner to believe, but I think you need to think of him as good as Petit defensively and as good offensively as Vieira. Okay, I accept that sounds over the top, but it's to give an idea of the complete player he was. And I thought Petit was underrated. He was helped by the conditions of the pitches and the rules at that time. And a typical Mackay tackle was a 5-yard slide tackle, taking ball and man in any order. When a striker was injured in those days of smaller squads, he would often play as a second striker. In his long throw, arrogance on the ball, and fearless hardman image, you will realise why true greats like Petit and Vieira are not a shoe-in to start in our team. There are many greats to choose from in midfield. But Dave Mackay, I think he also sort of rightly deserves a place in this 11 for what he achieved. League title, 60-61, 3 FA Cups and European Cup Winners' Cup, and that sort of versatility as well that he's able to play in defence. And just just Mr. Tottenham, really. I don't think you can put it any other way. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I think to show what a great player. I don't want to dominate it by going on about how great a player he was, because we are talking about a midfield that will be packed. I mean, there's guys here that won't get on, who are truly great players. I think great's overused, but we are talking about truly great players. When Spurs were playing in the '63 Cup Winners' Cup final,
And that was a big deal at the time because we'd never won, no one in British teams had never won a European trophy. And Mackay was injured for the final. And there's a famous tale that Bill Nicholson, who was Spurs manager at that time, was so depressed before the final that it was kind of rubbing off on the team because the loss of Mackay, he thought, I've lost my great player, sort of thing. And supposedly it was the captain, Danny Blanchflower, who did point out that actually there were at least four other great players in the team and a number of other very good players. I mean, it seems ludicrous now that he was so depressed given the Spurs side of that time. But it's more. There's an image to this guy at the time. There's that famous picture where he grabbed Billy Bremner. Bremner kicked him after his return from his, I think, his second break. The famous picture, and he said everything, Yeah. And there's another tale about him, which again is really amusing. And I wouldn't believe this tale, but I was there, and I think you could see it. They played it in one of the years they won the cup. Must have been '67. He committed, even by his own standard, a horrendous foul right at the start of the game. Supposedly, you know how hard it was to get sent off then. But the referee came over and said, "You're off." And Mackay says, "You can't say this is a well-known tale, and I believe it because I was there and I saw the foul." The referee says, "You're off," and he said, "You can't send me off." He said, "Why not?" He said, "I'm Dave Mackay, and 65,000 people have come to see me play." And supposedly the referee said, "Well, don't do it again," and ran off.
What a different time it was then, eh?
Yeah. But he had that arrogance, that kind of. So you've got you've got to put him in midfield, and then it gets incredibly difficult, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, although you said Patrick Vieira wasn't a shoo-in for this midfield, I just found it nigh on impossible for me not to have him on there. I mean, I completely agree with you. This is where it gets very difficult, but it's just the promise of having Patrick Vieira playing alongside Dave Mackay, just the idea of how solid and how wonderful that sort of chemistry and that partnership would work. For me, that's why I've just gone for Vieira there, because I think can you name me a single player that that would see Dave Mackay and Patrick Vieira on the team sheet? I think almost any footballer would think, I'm going home. I don't think they'd want to play the prospect of those two.
No. I mean, I can see the argument. One of the great problems here is that you're in the almost the position where players who. As I say, I was thinking, if you're going to use the word great, you have to define what you're talking about, exactly what level. Within the context of the British game, there's probably, for Spurs alone, 6 or 7 midfield players who you could genuinely say were great players. And I'll probably just mention them in a minute. But when you think of this, someone like Christian Eriksen, with no disrespect to him, in my opinion, probably isn't in the best, might come in about number 10 in terms of Spurs all-time midfield players in my lifetime. Because we do have to remember, obviously, there are players long before my time, so we were ignoring them really. But, it's very, very difficult when you look at the competition. As I say, if you were like, I thought Petit was incredibly underrated. But you probably don't need him in the team if you've got Mackay and you've got Vieira.
You could make an argument for Dave Mackay going alongside an even silkier sort of player opposed to Patrick Vieira. You could have Luka Modric in there. You could have Santi Cazorla there. You could have Danny Blanchflower there. Ozzy Ardiles. Cesc Fabregas. The sort of list goes on for the silkier sort of players. But for me, it's just that I think Vieira, what he gave you was that the physicality alongside. He was able to be silky and sort of quite graceful on the pitch at the same time. So where Dave Mackay would be the wall, I think Vieira can be that wall as well when needed to be. But I think he's that's a fearsome,
to glide physically. At times. Yeah, physically, that's a fearsome duo.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's, you know, that is a fearsome duo. And they would hold their own in any era. You know, I mean, I think Vieira was one of those players who he could have played in the 1960s. He'd be getting his foot in, you know. So you
considering I've gone for a Spurs player for the next player. So, you know, I've gone for 2 Spurs players and 1 Arsenal player. You've got to allow me Patrick Vieira there. So I've gone for...
no, I'm not arguing. I'm not arguing.
Okay, that's good. Well, for my, you know, as I mentioned before, you know, I've gone for that sort of central attacking midfielder, almost a sort of wild card position where you kind of expecting a player to just light the pitch up and just apply his magic. And I've gone for Glenn Hoddle. You know, it's just hard to you know, somewhat hard to put Vieira in over a list of players. It's just as hard in a way to do it with the attacking midfield because you've got Gaza, you've got Liam Brady, Perez, you know, mostly a winger, but he could also operate as that inside attacker.
Yeah.
Christian Eriksen, as you mentioned, Chris Waddle, Alexis Sanchez, that list goes on. But Hoddle, you know, what else can you say about Hoddle? I mean, he was just an absolute magician of a player. And I would say I have to have him on this list.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. You see, this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because I think I was watching the recent documentary about Hoddle, and there is no doubt some of the stuff, you know, it is the real top draw, isn't it? You know, some of the goals and everything else. And this is where I think it becomes difficult because how are you deciding? I mean, I think it's a tragedy. Well, tragedy, I don't like using that word in football terms, except about real tragedies like Hillsborough. But it's laughable, you know, the fact that there was any question about his England place and everything else. And yet when you compare, and this is where it gets very difficult, and about the generational thing, Danny Blanchflower played, I think he was 35 when Spurs did the double. And I can remember going to see him play for Ireland against England when it was a school trip. And he and the Irish team, basically, if you'd had listed the value of the players, of the 22 on the field, other than Jimmy McIlroy played for Burnley, who's another great player, and Blanchflower, the 9 Irish players were being the least valuable players on the pitch. There were players in that England team, if I remember right, that went on to be in the World Cup there. And McIlroy and Blanchflower ran rings around England. It was actually a draw, but I remember that. And I mean, I think they were 37 and 35, something like that. You know, put on about how wonderful Ronaldo is. So there's a massive argument in for a player like Blanchflower. Blanchflower was Britain's most expensive player in 1954. The Spurs did the double in 61. I think he was Football of the Year twice. It's a massive argument for him. But of course, also the other thing here is what is interesting. If you look at a team like this, we've got Perryman, Adams, these guys, massive figures, Mackay. Blanchflower was in the 1950s and 60s, along with Stanley Matthews and to a certain extent Tom Finney, was the biggest personality in English football. You know, he famously in his autobiography, there was a chapter, What Directors Know About Football. It's at the top of the page, and there's one page and it's blank. He is the guy that the whole, you know, I'm sure Arsenal fans will laugh, you know, it's all about style rather than winning stuff. But that whole thing about the kind of football teams that Spurs should have is all come from Mackay. So it's a massive argument for a player like him. I'm just going to mention, because I think one of the greatest tragedies in British football, John White, who also played in the Spurs double side, killed at 27 by lightning playing golf. Another absolutely brilliant player. I think if he hadn't been killed, I think we'd have been talking far more about him as a possibility here. Because if you look at that Spurs side, when they destroyed teams, and teams were destroyed, a bit like Man City sometimes do now, when it all goes right, it always seemed to be him that was the guy who had a 10 out of 10 game. And surrounded as he was by all those other really good players, you've got him. Another guy I think you have to look at here as a challenger going to Hoddle is Hoddle. I don't know if you know this story. It was there was a thing on Sky about an interview with him, but sort of about his career. In the 78 World Cup final, he was injured before the game, and 3 days before, it was no chance he'd play. They decided to play him, and he said that I was 50 or 60% fit. So one of the biggest countries in world football, the team that won it, played the guy who was clearly way below any normal fitness level in a World Cup final. He only lasted one half, but how good must you be to be playing like that? Yeah. So I always think Ardiles was underrated because he didn't do spectacular stuff. It was the little toe-ins and all this sort of stuff. So I'd actually go for Ardiles rather than Hoddle.
Yeah, I mean, you're preaching to the choir here, because I mean, this is between Glenn Hoddle, Ozzy Ardiles, or Danny Blanchflower. Of all players, I am a massive football fan, so I love football in general. But really, my knowledge of all three of those players is fairly little. So I'm more than happy for you to decide of who you want in that position.
Yeah, well, I would actually go. I think I'd go for Blanchflower because. When you look, Football of the Year, I think it was twice, most expensive player in Britain. And remember, he was most expensive player in Britain, despite the fact that the boards of almost every club he was at hated him. So that says something about how good he was. So I think you probably would have him in. I mean, there are, we're talking, there'd be Arsenal fans, older Arsenal fans saying, God, what about Liam Brady?
Yeah.
He was a name.
He was a name that was on my lips as well. But I thought just from seeing Glenn Hoddle and just sort of the technically the type of player he was definitely a player that was up there for contention. But I'm more than happy to go with Blanchflower if you want for him.
Just going to mention another very good Arsenal player in the 1960s, George Easton. Another player largely forgotten, was in the 66 World Cup squad, was never going to play under Alf Ramsey, but another very, very good player. When you think we haven't even talked about Gaza.
Well, I mentioned him. I did say that, Gaza was, the first sort of name that I mentioned that could easily be considered for that attacking midfield spot. But how many seasons was he there with Spurs? It was
a season, and I think that's why you discount it.
Yeah, it was fleeting, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah, I mean, a painful memory for you. One of the favourite memories for Spurs. The first half hour of the Cup semi-final in 91, on the basis of that, he'd be the first player on the team sheet. Because I've never seen anybody play in that brief period the way he did. He was just like, he was just berserk almost. Of course, that came back to haunt him in the final when he did exactly the same thing and got badly injured and was never the same player again. And I mean, another player, obviously, we're not, I mean, we're this is the difficulty. Modric, over his career, you'd have to put him in with these guys, wouldn't you? You'd have a really strong argument.
Yeah.
But I don't think at Spurs he improved.
No, it's for most what he did at Real Madrid, wasn't it?
Yeah. So, but that's the kind of level that you're talking about. Same as when we go to the forwards, I wouldn't consider Van Persie, but if you wanted to talk about Van Persie, Arsenal and Man United, it's a stronger argument,
The less said about him, the better. But if you find it hard talking about Sol Campbell, I'll find it hard talking about Van Persie. So,
I thought you might say that.
front three, I wonder what your take is on this, but I've gone for a sort of number 10, so it means that my 11 would be quite narrow, but I've gone for the non-flying Dutchman, Dennis Bergkamp. I mean, he's just my favourite ever Arsenal player. A lot of people talk about Mesut Ozil in the sense that, he was a magician, but Dennis Bergkamp was doing this.
Oh, no, there's no comparison.
No, Bergkamp was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Just the almost defying the sort of laws of physics when it comes to the stuff that he could do with the ball. I mean, you could absolutely smash a ball towards him and he'd turn it into a feather. Just a phenomenal footballer.
Yeah, I mean, you can't. It's difficult to argue with that. There's loads of there's a number of outside. I mean, if you look at the top four on Spurs all-time scoring list, you're talking Greaves, Bobby Smith, Martin Chivers, Harry Kane. You're talking 4 world-class centre forwards there. Arsenal, you're talking, aren't you, about Henry and Bergkamp and all these players. It's really difficult to choose, and it also depends the era in which you're looking at, because it's under the rules. Because the modern rules allow the very quick player to be untouched to a degree. A name I'm going to mention within this front three, in my opinion, one of the greatest players of all time, Cliff Jones. I surprised my son, his mates, a few years ago by saying Cliff Jones was as good as Gareth Bale. The only difference is that Gareth Bale is 6 inches taller and 3 stone, 4 stone of muscle heavier. That might not be quite the right in weight. But what you're talking about is the people in the game are bigger, they're stronger in that sense, but they didn't have the tackling. An average any North London derby when Cliff Jones was playing, he knew that within the first 5 minutes he'd be flying through the air, having been hacked down by there was a guy called Billy McCullough, or Flint McCullough, who was named after his nickname after a guy in a very popular Western on TV at the time. McCullough would hack him down within the first 2 or 3 minutes. Every game, Jones knew that was going to happen. It was like it was a day following night. I knew he wasn't going to get sent off. The referee would come over and have a word. Never ever got booked. Now, so you're. It's very, very difficult. What rules we playing under?
No, absolutely. But are you going for Cliff Jones over Mr. Jimmy Greaves? Because Jimmy Greaves was my second choice. But
I was going to say no, I'm not.
No,
because I agree. I mean, we are talking now. We are at the very top table. I mean, Jones represented, because they used to have a lot of representative games there. I think he played for the rest of the world in one day. But he played for Europe in things. We're talking about absolute, and he was magnificent. I mean, 5'8", but in the air. That goal, give you an idea how good he was in the air. The goal the Watford guy scored on Saturday against Newcastle, that was a Cliff Jones goal.
Yeah.
That was the kind of goal he used to score, but he was a small man and he'd hang in the air.
Almost like a sort of Ronaldo header.
Yeah, absolutely. Only 6 inches shorter.
So it deserves a lot of credit.
Very similar. But I mean, you've got when you're looking at this side, I think it's very difficult because of the makeup of the. I fully understand Bergkamp. You have to have Jimmy Greaves, don't you?
Yeah. I mean, where you mentioned with Pat Jennings, he was the sort of first name, and for me, Jimmy Greaves was also that. I've more or less built the team around Jimmy Greaves, and the next player, as you'll come to realise. But with Jimmy Greaves, I was not that long ago in a dispute with an Arsenal fan about how Ian Wright should be ahead of Greasy for the spot, but I don't know where, I thought that was ridiculous, but I really had to take my Arsenal hat off and I had to look at it objectively. And there's just no way you can't have Jimmy Greaves on here. 382 professional career goals, 220 for Spurs in 321 appearances. Wright might have had a more impressive trophy haul, but Greaves was just betters him for his clinical ability for putting the ball in the back of the net time and time again. He's done it for Chelsea, Spurs and West Ham, although his record at AC Milan is considered somewhat of a coffee blot. And I think you mentioned this in the Under the Floodlight special that we had, although it was, considered somewhat of a not as great as at times, he still managed 9 goals in 10 games. Incredible, really. And he got a Serie A winners medal whilst there too. So, if that's a bad time, I'd like to know what else isn't.
Yeah.
But on top of that, he's Spurs' all-time leading goal scorer, which kind of makes the Harry Kane situation even more interesting. So Harry Kane's only 30 odd goals away from that. But Jimmy Greaves.
Yeah, I think as I said when we did that special about him, it was an irony, wasn't there? In the sense he died shortly afterwards, and I said at the time how sad it is that the first thing people say is about he missed the '66 World Cup final, and it was sad, okay, but look at his club career. I mean, as I said at the time, 120 goals in 140 games, Chelsea. A team that never finished because I looked it up at the time. I'm not quite that much of an anorak. That Chelsea team never finished above 12th. I think one of the seasons they were about 4 from bottom.
Yeah.
When people look at Alan Shearer's goal scoring record, compared to Greaves, it's not in the same ballpark. And I think the greatest tribute that you could possibly play to Greaves is when he died, what Graham Souness said, which amongst the many tributes I thought was the one that stood out and made me feel that I wasn't going on over the top when I was there. He said, I played with all, players like Ian Rush and people like this. Now, I'd say, if you look at top strikers in my lifetime, Rush is up there with, Henry and Greaves and all these in that ball, that elite ballpark. Souness said, I played with it, a couple of, I can't remember the other players there, but he said, I played with Ian Rush and Jimmy Greaves was a level above him. Now that astounded me really at one level because a lot of Liverpool fans would have thought that was heresy.
Yeah.
But that's why he has to play in any team. No one's knocking Wright as a player. I've got admiration for a bloke who, annoying as he was when he was playing for Arsenal. He came from the Parks, didn't he?
Yeah.
And I mean, you can't knock his record. You can't knock players like Henry or Bearcat. Of course you can't. But the simple facts, the number of goals in number of games compared, say, to Shearer players who are top class like Shearer, says why he has to be in. And I always say, memory, the great memories of time. What you end up doing is that I make it sound like Jimmy Greaves never missed. Of course he missed.
Yeah,
he missed quite a lot. But he scored more than he missed less than other people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. More,
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a frightening, the prospect of Bearcat and Greaves,
Well, the prospect of this next guy I'm about to throw at you now. I mean, we had to put Spurs' all-time goal scorer. We have to put Arsenal's all-time goal scorer, the king of Arsenal, Thierry Henry, the club's all-time highest goal scorer, the main man behind our success, in that glorious period, the late 90s. He was Wenger's wonderful chess piece, if you will. Him and Vieira are the only players on this list with World Cup winners' medals. So, although both of them were sort of mostly used from off the bench during that World Cup, but just Thierry Henry, what can you say, really? Just an absolute, I mean, like you kind of mentioned with Ian Wright, where he got under people's nerves. Thierry Henry definitely did the same as well, but his arrogance was backed up with just incredible ability. He was.
I'm going to now. I'm not. You know, I've already talked about Cliff Jones and. There are a number of forwards we can argue about here. I suppose the one player that we haven't mentioned, and I think we have to mention, I dismissed Modric because his career mainly his best was at Real Madrid. Of course, it's very difficult not to have an argument about Henry or Bale, because Bale was outstanding at Tottenham, and obviously he went on to probably even greater things because he's playing a better team. So there's a hell of an argument for, you know,
Harry Kane even deserves somewhat of a mention as well, because Harry Kane's only 30 goals behind Jimmy Greaves. So for what Harry Kane's
that unfortunately is dismissing Greaves' goals at Chelsea, isn't it? You know.
Yeah.
So and and that's what you have to take into account. The other thing that I would say, and this is where I think it's really difficult when you pair. I mean, Harry Kane last week against Chelsea, I thought had a really quite decent game. And that was almost a surprise, because generally speaking, in big games, he doesn't do it. You know, it's his one proviso about Harry so far in his career is on the big occasion, he hasn't done it. Whereas players like Bale, Greaves, Henry, these are players who have done it in the big games. And I think that's the one argument about Harry. You know, I mean, Harry's carried that team. You know, there's no doubt about that. But I just don't think he gets in until he starts scoring goals in the games that matter. You know,
the thing for me with Henry is I just remember playing sort of fantasy football games and just noticing. I think it was because I played it about 6 seasons in a row, and just almost every one of those he was getting up to 25 plus a season, and he did that about 6 seasons in a row. I mean, it just goes to show how just incredible.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of players get the accolade, like Harry Kane, he gets the accolades for doing that, 3 seasons in a row. But players like back then were able to do it over such a consistent and long period of time. It was incredible.
If you were choosing between Henry and Bale, I think in the context of what we're doing here, you probably would just go for Henry on the basis of, you know, the slightly longer period that he was at the top at Arsenal than Bale was at the top at Spurs. Though he was again, Henry was playing a much better team than Bale was playing in at Spurs. Overall,
I think Henry's goal record separates him a little bit above Bale to a degree as well, surely.
Well, yes, but again, when you're playing in a much better team, you know.
Oh, come on, Thierry Henry. No. He was.
No, I get it. I see. You're never gonna persuade any Arsenal fan that he doesn't start, and I can understand that. Whereas Spurs fans will say, "Yeah, but what about Bale?" You know, wasn't just about scoring goals, but then it's very, very difficult to choose. I mean, you're literally talking about superstars, aren't you? And I'm quite happy to concede the Henry thing in the sense that, you know, I think if you looked at their total career, I can make a much stronger argument for Bale than based on just on his Tottenham career. So yeah, I mean, it's irrelevant, isn't it? In the sense that you could, I'm quite happy to say Henry, but you know, we could agree to disagree on that, a bit like the Tongan Judas argument. You know, I mean, it's
I totally understand your point that you're making. You know, Thierry Henry for me it's almost, you know, a sort of certified stamp that goes down. But yeah, you're completely right. You can't you have to mention the likes of Gareth Bale. You have to mention, other players when speaking, even Robert Pires, these types of players. Dimitar Berbatov, has to, and Robbie Keane, Jermaine Defoe. There are players out there that need to have a mention.
Also, yeah. Sorry, Simon, I interrupted you. I mean, if you again, it depending on what period of time you're playing these games in, because Bobby Smith, who was in the Spurs double team, and of course afterwards when Greaves arrived, they were a tremendous double act, because you had the ideal thing that a centre forward who scored lots of goals, but also was brutal, in terms physically, not by modern standards that big, but was terrifying, fearless, absolutely one of the bravest players you'd ever see. I've always said Cliff Jones and Bobby Smith, probably my two favourite Spurs players of all time, based on the fact that I've never seen two braver players than those two. Sort of stuff fans love, that kind of thing. So if you were playing this game in 1960, you could make an argument for Bobby Smith rather than Henry, probably. On those mud heaps. But if you were playing it under the current rules, there's no argument, So it's just interesting, isn't it?
No, definitely. But I think if we just look at this this team sheet in the sort of cold light of day, what an absolute team that would be. The type of incredible football that they'd actually put on display would be scary. And I think for me, what stands out the most is that pairing of Mackay and Vieira. Like I said, if I was an opposing player, I would not show up on the team bus that day. I just wouldn't.
I think also, if you're looking, you've got everything there up front, haven't you? You've got the pace of Henry, the predatory nature of Greaves' goal scoring. You've got somebody like Bearcat who's got his sort of silky skills. And if you were going to argue about, but equally, if you were to substitute Bale for Henry, you'd still have exactly the same thing: sheer pace. The whole. I mean, that is I think there'd be a lot of people who would probably be surprised by the fact that I went for Danny Blanchard over Ardiles or Hoddle. But I just think if you look at his record, it says people have forgotten about it. It's kind of because we don't see a lot of him, because there isn't that much footage. But we are talking about, all that. Looking at that team, I would say at any level, you've probably got, even at world level, you've probably got 7 or 8 players who you genuinely say are all-time greats. If you're talking your 100 best players, there's players in there that are real top level. We've done all right there, haven't we?
I definitely think we have. And I think, where, like we sort of mentioned with that front three, if you were sort of going up against that, you'd have to contend with that. Not only that, then you'd have to think, how on earth am I going to get past this defence? Because that wouldn't be too easy either. It's been an absolute pleasure doing this. It's been a lot easier than I thought it was going to be as well. I thought we were going to come to heads a bit more, but then no, it's been fantastic. And I think, like you say, we've done really well to come up with a great team here. And
absolutely. I mean, the frightening thing, and this would be applied also to Man United, Manchester side, a best Liverpudlian side, whatever would probably be the other two great contenders. Obviously Chelsea fans would be screaming, well, what about but I don't think Chelsea Fulham side would be quite so powerful. But Fulham had one or two. We just don't know. You've got George Cohen and Johnny Hayes. I forgot about it. You forget about these players. But when you look at that side and you think, you mentioned nowadays the subs bench. You could bring, especially with the 5 subs. Suddenly, you're bringing on Gazza and Ian Brady and
Perez.
you know, and,
Petit.
Have the last 10 minutes with Perez on one side and Cliff Jones on the other. Yeah, you know, when you're tiring. Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah, and you could have the likes of Ledley King for the last 10 minutes as well, trying to get him past him.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting, isn't it, that we didn't even discuss, you know, the Arsenal, the famous Arsenal George Graham back four, you know, that really, you know, we're only really talking about Tony Adams from that, you know, and when you consider, you know, how tough they were you know, it's not it's a very powerful side.
Yeah. Definitely. Right, Les, I'm going to have to love you and leave you. It's been fantastic again. Thanks for coming on the show. And thanks for helping me come up with this wonderful Arsenal combined with Spurs 11. I think we've done a great job.
It might need a bit of editing because I think we've gone on a bit long.
Oh, that's fine. I don't mind, you know, considering I'm a massive Arsenal fan and I've got, you know, I wouldn't say admiration, but I've got somewhat respect for Spurs as well. I'm happy to make this as long as it needs to be.
Brilliant. All right, mate. You stay safe.
Yeah.
And we'll speak again sometime.
Thank you so much for listening to the Triple F. If you could please drop a like on our Facebook page, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and follow us on Twitter, that would be massively appreciated. Hope you're all keeping safe, and thanks again for listening to the Triple F.